it's been a very long week, and the snow has not stopped.
Wow, like we had snow about maybe 2 weeks ago. I'm in Toronto, Canada, but it's
Oh,
been so cold,
mm-hmm.
like ridiculously cold. Like people's cars haven't started.
Oh,
I had to get an actually I had to get a new battery for my car because I work from home. So it sat
mm-hmm.
there for like 2 or 3 days, and I was like, I forgot to
Wow.
go start it. So it's been
That
cold.
sounds like a different code.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those colds where, when you look outside your window and you're like, it looks cold. You're like, I don't need proof. I'm just gonna stay right here, So, but I saw someone in shorts because I went to the gym and I saw someone in shorts and I can see the steam from their calves. And I was
Oh
like, you're
my
gonna be
goodness.
so sick when you get home. Because when
Yeah.
you go to the gym, right? Like you can't wear winter jackets and working out. But I was like, you gotta change, man. You gotta change before and after. You have to.
Oh my goodness. I couldn't. I couldn't.
So today, I know we're going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about something that is close to your heart, something that's close to my heart.
Mhm.
I'm going to say that you're the expert, but I guess that's an understatement, right?
um, I'm gonna say I'm just me.
Just you.
I'm just me.
Perfect. So let's jump right into. So take us through this. So, what type of trauma did you go through, or maybe that you have discussed in your current journey?
Oh goodness. Well, I grew up truly. I grew up with a form of scoliosis, so um, it was real early on in life. I think my last surgery was probably around age 10. So I was, in a depression around 11 years old. And I was a very smart child. My mom, she was around, but she was not around. I grew up with her being the oldest child and her, just always in the streets. And it was really hard for me taking care of my siblings and then, not really having, my father around and having to see my mother, go through a lot of the things that she went through as far as, being abused physically. And, that really took a toll on me at a young age. And as I got older, it never stopped at all. It got so bad to where I just separated from my mom at some point and was basically living either with my grandmother or, some other family member. So, hey, I'm sorry. So I never really got, to really be around family like that. And I'm sorry. I didn't have a lot of love going on. And I was just a very smart kid who just understood a lot of things. And then as I got started to get older, living on my own, having to, around 15, having to really do for myself. I got into a relationship and then the relationship turned into, mental abuse and physical abuse because I was so young. It really carried and carried and carried on to the point to where I almost lost my life for the most part. And that was the hardest part for me to, try to overcome. I reached out to my father and that did not work. And I'm sorry.
So I guess like for me, when I sometimes hear stuff like that, it reminds me of like so many people who
Come
maybe
here,
who
Buster.
grew up with
Come here.
some difficulty where there's like a disconnect between, let's say, themselves and maybe their parents, because their parents, for whatever reason, isn't able to provide to the child what the child will need. Let's say, for example, the type of love, the type of attention. And what sometimes happens is that lack of, let's say, positive upbringing can impact us in so many different ways. Like you have some people that, let's say, you have like some men who end up in like gangs on the streets running around. You have some girls who end up in like toxic and destructive relationships or who become very promiscuous.
Yeah.
So when you look back, like how did that affect you as you were growing up from, let's say, your adolescence into like maybe adulthood?
I didn't have any direction. I knew I didn't have any type of direction. Everything that I was learning it from, the person that I was dating, and I was learning it from apparently, the outside world, like, the streets, because I didn't know a lot in life, but I knew enough. And for me, I was just a very loving person. So not being able to receive any of the love that I, was giving, even from my mother to my siblings, and it was just never truly reciprocated. It really damaged me to my core. And, unfortunately now I do not communicate as much as I, would have wanted to in the past. I don't communicate with, my family as much now because, you know, I can't be loved properly to me.
Do you think that is also tied into maybe, let's say, some of your relationships outside of your family as well?
Yeah. I can only say like I haven't really had too many relationships really in life in general. I had didn't have a lot of friends. I was only in two relationships my whole life, and they were very long term. So I didn't have any, I didn't have anyone really. Um, it was just me after a while. It was
I hear
real
that
hard.
so often, right? Like I look at, um, and you mentioned like you're on Instagram, right? So you probably see like a lot of people who, when they're sharing, um, let's say like there's interviews and they're sharing their story, how they didn't have love growing up, or the type of love that they had growing up. They look back now and they're like, you know what? That wasn't really love. Right? You look back and you're like, that was something, but it definitely wasn't love.
Right.
Right? And then as you look through, let's say your romantic relationships or your personal relationships or your professional relationships, you begin to see patterns like, okay, that reminds me of how my mother used to treat me. Okay, that reminds me of how my father used to treat me. Okay, I can see why I do this because when I wasn't getting this, this is what I needed to do to get it. Did you notice things about yourself which reminded you of your upbringing? You're like, okay, this is what, this is why I do the things that I do.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of things, and even with me being a mother of five, there's so many things on the mental and emotional side that I definitely if I am not giving it to my own kids, I noticed it instantly because I knew how it felt, when I didn't have, just for my mother to say I love you, even if it's every now and then, just things like that are what I really, really pay attention to. It's now a trigger for me if I don't do those good things that I wanted, because I'll tell my kids like, hey, I didn't have this growing up, and if it's too much for you, let me know, because I think I may overdo it just a little bit.
You mentioned your children. When
Mhm.
you're interacting with them, like what are some of the ways that you ensure that you're not repeating some of the things that happened to you with your children?
Ooh. And see that was it really, I'm gonna be honest, it took me a lot and a long time, because mentally I was struggling as a an individual, um and as a mother, and going through a lot of the things that I ended up going through as a parent, and as a wife. It was really hard for me to even noticed that I was doing the exact same things that, my mom and dad had did to me, just in a slightly different way, as far as like abandonment. I felt like I was abandoning my children because of the situations that I had a part in putting them in. Um, it's really hard to notice and see that you're doing things to harm your child, or you're doing things that your mother did, and I didn't like that, and that's what really made me change on that note.
I can just imagine how painful that must be to realize that I don't have the type of healthy relationship that I would want with my mother or my father. And here I am, I have children, and I see some of that coming up in my upbringing with them. And then there's always that saying, right? Like we pass down our trauma from generation to generation. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like you and I look like around the same age. Like, do you remember like how we used to give clothes to our cousins and stuff like hand-me-downs? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's like that, right? Like instead of giving everyone clothes, you're giving everyone your trauma. You're like, here, wear this, here,
Yeah,
wear that, right?
you're right
And it
about that.
right, right. It's kind of scary because I don't think we mean to intentionally. It's not like we say, okay, Ashima, here's my trauma, take it and show the world, right? Become this
Mhm.
brute like me. I don't think we mean to do that. And then sometimes when I look back on like what my parents go through, because I grew up without my parents,
Mhm.
sometimes I wonder what I went through. Is it possible that they went through the same thing when they're children and they
Mhm.
didn't know any better? So their baseline is the trauma, where other people, their baseline is a healthy relationship. I love you. I care for you. You're important. When you now that you're more knowledgeable, more experienced, is there a possibility that maybe your parents are going through their own trauma and in a way that they're passing it down to you?
I definitely believe that. With my mother and my father, with my father, he was never around because he was primarily in prison. So, here and there throughout my life, I would try to connect, and it didn't really work because of the mentality and the traumas that he was going through. And it took me almost 30 years to understand that he was consistently dealing with his own traumas, which was holding him back from being the father that he could have been. And then with my mother, uh, I believe the same thing because, I understand she dealt with a lot. I've seen her go through a lot, and she presented to be very strong. And, in my time of trying to grow and heal, trying to mend things with her, um, I noticed that she just was not there yet. So that's, when I had to step back and realize, okay, yeah, she hasn't dealt with her traumas either. So this is where I have to tread lightly. And my mother was, primarily the parent around for the most part, but, more than my dad. But, you know, she has to still, I think she has to heal before I can fully have a relationship with her.
What are some of the ways that you think they would have to heal, as you mentioned, before you can have the type of relationship that you'd want with them?
Wow. I think acknowledgement first that that they do have flaws, and they do have traumas that have not been dealt with. And I say acknowledgement because I've gone to both of them in my adult life, and have tried to be that communicative and understanding daughter, and they were just you know this was never it. It was there. They just could not own up to it or acknowledge that, first acknowledge the way that I felt, and then acknowledge, you know, the way life turned out to be. I mean, so until I get acknowledgement, hey, that's the first step.
I think that's important. I think it's important to acknowledge that we did something wrong. I did something wrong. You did something wrong. Everyone did something wrong. And what I find sometimes, because I work with a charity and they deal with women who've been financially, emotionally abused.
Mhm.
And one thing I've learned working with these women is because they're older, they're about, let's say, in their 50s and 60s. So they're from an era where not a lot of people talked about these things.
Mhm.
I realize that some people, some parents, it doesn't matter how old the child is, they still look at that person as a child. And
Mhm.
because they look at that person as a child, they won't ever apologize or acknowledge what they've done to that child because they're looking at it as, well, it wasn't that bad because you weren't homeless. And I think some people think just because there's a structure over your head means that's love, where in fact it's not only what is over your head, meaning the roof, it's what's actually inside of it. And I think a lot of homes don't have love inside of
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that still tie love and happiness to material things. So I'll give you an
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
I paid for your school and you always have food on the table. So you shouldn't need anything else. And that's fair, right? Because you always want to make sure that you have your survival, like your basic needs,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But what sometimes happens is that, let's say someone gives you a nice cooked meal, but you know they hate you. That meal's going to taste differently.
Right.
Right? Versus when you know someone's made it with love.
Right.
So I think sometimes parents fail to acknowledge um, their children's childhood
Mhm.
because in a lot of ways it's beneath them, or in a lot of ways they still view the person as a child. When you look back on your parents not acknowledging it, as you mentioned, your mother specifically,
Mhm.
do you think that maybe she still sees you a certain way and that's why she can't bring herself to acknowledge what has happened?
You know what? I absolutely do. And I've always said this because it's just because of the way she has always treated me. Like I said, I'm the oldest child of now six, and I've seen her through the worst. Like my siblings don't even know. They have no idea what we went through growing up. Even as very very young kids, I can remember things as young as 2 to 4 years old. So, and like I said, I had scoliosis at a young age, and that took a toll on me, and a toll on her as well. As a young mother, she had me at 15. So, she always kind of treated me like I was not able to do things. And, I used to tell her, like, hey, I want to be a psychologist, or, things like that. And she would always say that I wouldn't be able to get that far. And then just with anything, she just didn't think that I could do things. So now that you're saying, she may, parents may see their child still as a child. And I truly think that that is exactly what it is. I never actually grew up to her, even though I'm one of the brightest of the bunch. I just have not. Maybe I may not have grown.
You mentioned that you're the oldest. Is that correct? You're the eldest?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite a burden for the oldest child to carry. And
Oh yeah.
I'm the oldest in my family, and I look at like my cousins, same thing. The oldest always seems to go through a difficult time because a lot of expectations are placed on them,
Hmm.
whether they're warranted or not.
Yeah.
And even though they may perform the best out of, let's say, if there's two, three, four children from the parents, is that they don't ever seem to get the attention that they
Yeah.
need in comparison to the other siblings. And I look back on some of the parents I spoke to, and the ones that do this, they were the oldest themselves. It's
Mm.
interesting to see how the treatment that they got, they pass it on because I guess to them they probably thought it was normal. Well, there's demands of me, I had to do this. I remember one person said, well, I had dreams too, and I had to give them up because my father needed me or my mother needed me. And the one question I would ask them is like, okay, but how did that make you feel? Like, look back and remember, how did that make you feel?
Right.
And then they bring back the pain and the heartbreak. I was like, if that's what you felt, why would you want your child to go through that?
Right.
Right? So why do
Mhm.
you think there's that disconnect between the parents remembering what they went through and not liking it, and then somehow they're still passing that on because they think it's normal?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. They think, well, that's how I was brought up, and it's completely normal. You'll be okay. You know that's those are the main reasons I've heard. Nothing more than you'll be okay. This is life. This is how I was brought up. You be, yeah. I don't know. It's just crazy.
Yeah, that's so tough. That is so tough because when you look at other people who are successful, they don't have to go through that, right? Like one example I gave to someone is, let's say you're walking down the street, right? And you have a choice. You either go to walk through one street that has well lit, like you know this beforehand. It's well lit, no crime, the grass is green, white picket fence, everything, right?
Yeah.
That's street number one. Then street number two, the houses look run down, the grass is brown, you can hear the crime, you can see the drugs on the ground.
Right.
Which one would you choose, right? I get most, and almost everyone will say that they're going to pick the first choice, which is going to look safer and everything, right?
Hmm.
And then I go to the person, then why would you choose the second street for someone? Why would you want to intentionally put someone in a situation where there's danger when you know beforehand there isn't? And it's interesting the choices that we make out of hope. You know what, Ashima? I hope it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I hope you won't be damaged too much by it. Versus, okay, let me think about this logically. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I set up this person for the best possible scenario, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Do you like, what are your thoughts on some people not thinking logically and not preparing themselves versus, okay, let's just wing it. Whatever happens, happens. And I hope you come out the other side okay.
Oh wow. And see, that's the logic thinking is something that I believe is very rare these days. I don't think there's any logic anymore. And as the years have gone, the logical thinking has drastically dropped year by year. And I have a problem with understanding, myself, why is that? Because there's no common sense being used. I understand that people they like to plan ahead, or some people, like you said, like to, oh, we'll just see what happens. So we're just gonna take it day by day, or jump right in. Let's go on an adventure. People seem to a lot of times not have fear anymore, or just a care in the world, and will just jump and do things instead of just really taking that time to use that common sense that you got or was given, and just use it. But I don't understand why it's not being utilized.
Yeah, but when it comes to your children, that you can't play around with that, right? Like kids
No.
are so vulnerable. It's like
Yes.
if you were to go to someone and say that, okay, hopes and dreams, right? There's a school over here where there's people who are abusers, rapists, all this stuff, right? I'm gonna go put my kids there. And I hope they won't be one of the victims. Like parents won't do
Right.
that, right? Because most people are gonna be like, okay, I don't even want to even put anyone in that situation, right? But there seems to be like levels to it. It's like, okay, I know this isn't the best of situations, but I'm raising you to be a strong person. That's fine. We all have to be strong, right? Like we have
Right.
to make sure that we're all prepared.
Mm.
But if you don't have to put someone in a traumatic situation, then why put them in a traumatic situation? If you
Right.
can give someone love instead of hurt, why not give them the love?
Right.
Right? I think sometimes what we forget is that we don't need to put someone in a situation for them to understand the lesson of that situation.
Mhm.
We can just tell them this is the lesson of the situation. I don't need to burn my hand on a stove to know the stove is hot and I should have put my hand on there.
Right.
Someone can just tell me that, you know what, Train, the stove is hot. Be careful around it. Right. But I think sometimes what some people seem to forget is that we put ourselves in situations thinking that I went through this, I weathered the storm, I survived it. I need you to go through what I went through. But not everyone is built for that type of pressure, right? You know, like how you make diamonds under pressure, right? Like every diamond, every time you put, a stone under pressure, it becomes a different type of diamond. Not all diamonds are the same.
Right.
So when you look at your children now and your relationship and what you're going through, what are some of the ways that you are making sure that your children grow up in a way that was more beneficial and more positive than what you had?
Oh wow. Well, first thing is I'm very present. I'm very, very present. My kids do not go to daycare. They never have. School, I keep my kids, they're homeschooled for the most part. I did try school. Did not work out. Um, I want them to learn, the things that I did not learn in life. And I understood that I didn't, utilize anything I learned in school. So I felt like I need to give my kids a life to where they can, survive in the real world, not just, a 9 to 5 world. Um, I make sure I'm very communicative. I tell them I love them every single day, even if it gets on their nerves. I talk to them a lot. I share my oldest three. I have three older boys. They're ages between 16 and 14, and I share them with their dad, and they stay 45 minutes away from me. And they actually attend school. They actually attend, public school. But for them, they're all boys. Wow, I have to literally, bug them. I have to be on them. I'm like constantly in their business. I'm doing a lot of things that my mom did not, do for me. I'm making sure that they understand that, I love them, and I make sure talk to them to see how they feel. Um, Whenever they're going through things, I can actually feel it. So I'll call and pester them or sit them down and say, hey, I know something's going on. You might want to tell me now before I find out later. And it's just, I'm just very communicative. I'm there. I'm there because I don't want someone else out in the world to, take them away. And unfortunately, with my oldest child, that did happen. And that's a situation that I had to, recently deal with because he's my baby. He's my baby. He's 16, but he's still my baby, and he's at the girlfriend stage. So it's a lot, but I'm present because my mom was not, and I made mistakes, and I don't want them to do the same thing.
Nothing beats young love.
Yeah,
So
I try
let
to
me ask you,
remember that.
yeah, it's different. Teenage love is definitely then different than love in your 20s and definitely than your 40s. Like love in your 40s, like you're more refined, right? Like you're not Walt Disney, pull up in the carriage, if I don't
Right.
get home before midnight, it's gonna turn into a pumpkin. Those days are gone once you're in your 30s and 40s. Let me ask you, was that the way everything that you described, was that easy or difficult for you to do, knowing that you're learning it as you go along, but you want to make sure that your children have it as well?
Well, first it was extremely difficult to deal with for the most part because you know again I realized that I had put my kids in a situation, giving them somewhat of a life that my mother, kind of gave me growing up. So that was hard for me to deal with. And then the next thing that was pretty tough was, just try not to continue to make the same mistakes because I know things happen. I know I really do. I understand things happen in life, and I understand kids as well. But and that's another reason why I go so hard, and I, taken the time to understand because I was a kid once who went through these traumas. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding it, that they're understanding, and I'm there. It should, but it's hard. It really is.
So how important do you think that is not only for your children but for you to be able to do?
Ooh, it's really important. Like I said, my main goal and my goal is somewhat also a fear of mine, not being able to continue to keep the bonds that we have and make sure that I am doing my part and being the parent, being a mother. Um, I understand that kids will think different, especially these days. Their heads are all over the place, and it's I pray for these kids every day. But it's in this society, it's not easy being a teenager or a young adult in general. So it's so important for me to stay on top of this. I do not want my kids to stray away, or end up doing things that will get them in trouble. And it's like then I'm looking at myself like I could have been there more. I don't want that to happen. So it's extremely important for me to push, even if I am, getting on their nerves. I'm fine with that.
I tried to rebuild my relationship with my parents, and I found success in a lot of ways, and I didn't find success in a lot of ways. And one thing I realized very early on is that you have to make a choice. And then I break it down into something as simple as this. Either you want to be right or you want to be happy, because sometimes you can't be both.
Mm,
And I realized once I started to view relationships with my parents and let's say other family members that way,
mm,
that's where I began to let go of some things, because there's sometimes I used to sit there and be like, nope, I'm right. And I would
mm.
just sit in my feelings of being right.
Right.
You know what happened? The other person, they're living their life. Right?
There you
Where
go.
you're trapped in this prison of your own emotion because you think that they know what you're feeling. They can care
Mm-hmm.
less, right? It's like someone who's been abusing you. Once the abuse stops, sure, you have the difficulty of recovery, but a lot of times they moved on to the next victim. A victim graduates as often as a college class. Like every
Mm-hmm.
year, there's another person to be victimized, right?
Yeah.
So when you're in a situation thinking that you're going to sit there and be right and you're thinking the person's going to come to you and correct it, sometimes that day never comes. Sometimes it does.
Yeah.
But if you want to be happy, less stressed, less anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
better health, because let's be honest, right? Like when you're sitting in your unhappiness, it's only impacting you. You're not putting on this health issues onto someone else. You're like, I'm unhappy. Take this stress. They've moved on. But on the flip side to that, I can see why maybe some people are hesitant because they may think that, you know what, I don't want to put in that type of effort. That's
Mm-hmm.
perfectly fine. But the best things in life always require effort,
Yeah.
right? And if you don't want to remedy a situation, that's perfectly fine, but don't sit in it. And I have a friend who he does that. He's consumed by negativity.
Mm-hmm.
And this consumption of it makes him physically aggressive, verbally aggressive. He's damaged people's properties because of it. He has a short temper because of it. And in the last year or so, he even says things like he hates people.
Ooh.
And what some people don't understand, I think, is that that's a very dangerous place to be, because when it comes to school shootings and stuff like that, that's the type of rhetoric you hear from them.
Yeah.
I don't like people. I don't like this. I don't like that. I want to lash out,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, what are some of the ways that maybe you help to regulate yourself to make sure that you're not consumed by some of maybe your past emotions as you're going forward in your life to make sure that your life is better off going forward?
Mhm. Well, first, I learned exactly what you said. And it's not something, I've heard it for years, but I never really applied it. And it was the fact that I'm over here, waiting on you to come around and you're living your best life while I'm in a slumber. So once I really took that in and applied that to myself, oh goodness, my life really turned around. So what I don't do is I don't really communicate with people who have brought these traumas and who, or have not grown. I keep them at a distance. And unfortunately, like I said, I never really had a lot of friends, but I was always close. I always wanted that closeness with my family. And now that I've grown and I'm wanting to make sure I stay happy first, the communication is at a minimum, like completely, because you guys are causing me this trauma. So I don't deal with people who bring trauma. Unfortunately, I realized over the past couple of years that I was an empath, and that explained a lot for me. So I don't watch a lot of things that I used to watch. Uh, I don't listen to a lot of music I used to listen to because now that I've grown more, it actually has affected me emotionally, whether I knew it or not. So I cleaned my act up and I cleaned up my environment, and I don't stress. I don't do none of that. I put me first.
I love that you said that you put yourself first because you're responsible for everything around you and everything
Exactly.
that impacts you,
Yeah.
right? And that's a very courageous and powerful place to be. Once you remove the power that other people have over you, I'm this
Hmm.
way because of that, I'm this way because of them, you begin to realize, like, okay, I can have the life that I want. I don't have to sit in my victimhood, no matter how bad it is. I
Yeah.
can turn this around. I can go from victim to victor. So as we close, what final words do you want to share with our audience today to help them move forward in their lives?
First, I always tell people that pay attention to yourself first. You have to love yourself the way you want someone else to love you, but you got to do it first. You got to love you first. You can't love anybody else. You can't expect anybody to love you the way that you want to be loved. Because if you loved yourself just as much as you want someone else to love you, it'd be much easier for them to love you. It'd be much easier for you. That's one thing that I really, really push. Love yourself first before you can love anybody else.